Mitch Marner ruffles feathers with a media ban at his charity event. Leafs reporter David Alter stops by to share why he thinks this is a bigger deal than you'd think. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leafs-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Still searching for a great candidate for your company? Don't search, just match with Indeed. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. What's going on, Dave? How you feeling on a Monday?
Well, feeling better than anybody that went to that Copa America final.
Yeah, I don't know what. Oh my God! Like just mayhem, absolute mayhem ahead of that game. Like, oh, Jesus Louise! There was
thousands of fans with
in a
tickets.
couple of years. Like,
Yeah.
I figured it out.
Oh, I think this was a big eye opener for. Well, it's the South American Federation that put this together.
Yeah, they're a rowdy bunch.
Yeah, FIFA's gonna have a few phone calls tomorrow, I think.
Yeah. Hey, in 2 years, this better be fixed. There's not going to be this problem in 2 years, correct? Yes, we will try it. We will figure it out. Yeah, just absolute mayhem. A bleep show, I guess is what you could call it. After what was an exceptional Euro Cup final. I mean, that was awesome. That was such a great game. I was fully enthralled in that football match. Like I'm not Mr. Soccer. I'm not the biggest soccer guy. I get into the big international tournaments, but great win. Congratulations to Spain. The best team, the better team won, the best team won. And that header off the line to keep it a 2-1 lead. Like, that was just exceptional. So yeah, congratulations. The summer of soccer, I guess, is over now. And now it's the lull. This is the week. This is the lullest week in sports, where MLB is done for the week, right? It's MLB All-Star Week. Everyone had their final games, and now they're done. They're heading out to, where's the All-Star game? I don't even know where it is.
Texas.
Is it in Texas?
Yeah, it's at the Rangers Stadium.
Right. So everyone's kind of heading out to Texas for All-Star Week, and so there's no baseball, there's no hockey, obviously. There's summer league basketball if you want to see what's going on there, I suppose. But not much, not a whole lot. It's the dull week, that's for sure. But hey, you and I, we're here through it all, buddy. And hey, we did, have something to talk about today, because over the weekend, Mitch Marner had his charity event. The Marner Foundation, they put this on every year. I think it's 6 years in a row now they've done this, and I think it's great. First and foremost, it's awesome that Mitch Marner gives back to the community and raises money for charity, and that's amazing, right? And I'm all for anthropology and everybody being as good as humans as they could possibly be. That being said, Mitch ruffled some feathers, or his team rather ruffled some feathers, by not allowing the mainstream media to attend the event this year. With that, why don't we head off to our interview that we had with David Alter, who wrote about this and wrote about why he thinks this is a bit of a bigger deal than you might think, and why potentially this may be the final straw of why he might not be cut out for Toronto after all. It was quite the piece that David Alter wrote. So why don't we throw things off to him? Here's our conversation we had with David Alter from the Hockey News. And joining us now on the Locked On Leafs podcast is friend of the show. It's David Alter from the Hockey News. What's going on, Dave? Good to have you on again.
Good to be on. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. What are you getting up to these days? I mean, the hockey's kind of settled a little bit, so you getting to enjoy the early parts of your summer?
Not really. I mean, the Hockey News Toronto page is filled with news, so it's a lot of loading content. We're like a team of 3 now, which is nice. So just been doing that, and I'm hoping as things kind of die down into August, so it will be some time to kind of unwind and engage or disengage. But for now, yeah, it's been nonstop, and it's a good thing. I'd rather be busy than not busy. So for sure, it's a
Well,
good.
I mean, as Dave and I both know, it's never a dull moment in Leafland, obviously. So there's always something to write about or talk about, right? It's just the kind of we live in the hockey mecca. There's always something, and you had a piece, a pretty explosive piece on the website this past weekend that pretty much had to do with Mitch Marner's decision not to allow like the mainstream Canadian sports media giants, TSN and Sportsnet, to attend his annual charity event this weekend, which, in the past, media has attended the event, and there's been a red carpet gala, and they've been able to speak with Marner and the teammates that show up, and it was a little bit different this year. So why don't you walk us through exactly kind of how this year differed from others, and kind of what the situation was this past weekend?
Yeah, so this is the 6th year. There's been a couple of years where it's been different because of COVID, obviously, right? And so, of course, everyone's respectful of that. But
Mhm.
in normal years, there's been a red carpet. Media were asked to come, and there'd be one-on-one interviews granted. And the traditional thing is ask some questions about the team or whatever, but promote the event. It's it's very much a transactional type of situation like that. It's kind of like it's not ever really spoken about that way. It's the bare minimum, really. It's we'll promote your event, we'll talk about it. We got to get 1 or 2 questions in.
Yeah.
It's usually the terms of engagement or whatever it is. So obviously, there's a lot of interest on Mitch Marner going into this year. But when finding out about the event and reaching out and asking what's going on, we're told from Marner's side, there's not going to be a red carpet this year, and any events and interviews will be limited, and there'll be limited slots for it, and it will be not exclusive to the event, but they said we ask that it will be about the event only. And then as the week got closer, there was a lot of negotiation with that side from a lot of media members about what will and won't happen. And then it got to a point where it's like, yeah, sports ENG cameras were not permitted to kind of go. And so it's not something as an isolated incident we would just be like, well, this happened and that. It's more so everything that's led up to this decision that made it kind of worth writing about, from what is media's rights and obligations, responsibilities, all that kind of stuff. But it's not just an isolated incident. We generally give a lot of platitude for sensitivities, for situations, for stuff like that. But it's been a culmination. It's been a buildup that's led to this, that leads it to going down a very slippery slope that I don't think needs to be precedent setting or shouldn't be allowed to be happening without something being said or written about, which is why we decided to write the story.
Well, you pose the question in the piece of, whether this decision, I guess, to avoid the media, for lack of a better word, kind of shows that he may not be cut out for the Maple Leafs anymore. Explain why you think that might be the case.
Yeah, I feel, and this is my personal opinion, I think some other media members feel this. I think there's a large section of fans who do feel this way, that when you're a member of the Toronto Maple Leafs, that there are some responsibilities that kind of go with it. And it might be different in other markets in terms of the demand on your time and all that other kind of stuff. But Toronto is the biggest market, afforded the best resources for one reason alone. And it's because they are the most popular fan base and engaged fan base of any of the 32 NHL clubs. I don't care what anyone else says. The revenues show it. Every other metric shows it. And so when you're starting to shy away and take away from some of that other stuff and duck away from that, and it's becoming more so, it's not wrong to question that, in my opinion. It's not wrong to question that. And so it just seems like over the course of the last year or so, he's pulling away more and more without explanation. You know, if there is an issue, we're always happy to talk about it, but we've never been given that platform to really talk about what sort of issue it is. Because look, if he's got an issue, let's talk about it. Like, I know for a fact that there was in Edmonton, you know, the relationship between a player and some media was starting to get pretty testy, that they started having behind the scenes kind of dialogue about it to kind of smooth things over.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not afforded that in this situation. And so I start to wonder, well, I mean, if the solution is to pull more and more away from the responsibilities that come with this, then yeah, I think it's fair to ask that maybe he's not cut out for that particular type of market. I'm not saying trade him. I'm not saying he should be gone before this year or anything like that. I'm just saying for his future beyond this year or whatever, because he is an unrestricted free agent, maybe he's not cut out for it anymore.
We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to U.S. Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Just a busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. So join more than 3.5 businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Well, why do you think that the Maple Leafs as an organization are pretty tight to the vest with things and don't give a lot of access to media and really to anybody? Like even when I was in there, like it's pretty buttoned up and there's not a lot of people that get an opportunity to go in there and speak to the players. And when
Right.
you do, I mean, they're pretty quick to whisk you away if things start to get out of hand. Like they'll shut down interviews quickly. Like why is that? And do you think that is doing a disservice and maybe creating some of this kind of friction between the team and the fan base and the media coverage around everything?
I think past performance is probably the number one thing, as the whole not getting over the hump, not winning deep in the playoffs with the core and all that. I think it becomes a thing where what flows downhill. And so there's more pressures from the top that go to whatever, that go to whatever, that go to whatever. And then for whatever reason or another, it's changed. Now, there's a 3-year gap where I wasn't covering the Leafs on a regular basis between 2018 and 2021. And I remember what it was like before I got there, and I remember what it was like after. And I don't know if COVID gave a smoking gun to kind of change certain things, because I do remember that when we were starting to be allowed into rooms in Toronto, they were actually very good about that, where some other teams were still doing Zooms and not letting media into the room. And so I'll give credit for the Leafs when it's due, because sometimes there was an opening of that. But when they did open it up, you're right. It seems to be fast, wrapped up. It depends who's there when they're there. There's been times where it's just been me on the road for some games, and it's a little bit different. But sometimes it's you put in requests, they're not going to answer them. It's you get who you get, and there's certainly some of that. And so I'm not I'm not here to play the team's access and how they do things versus media thing. Like that's certainly not what I was trying to open up when talking about this. But I understand the deeper question around it. But look, generally when it's come to practices, if I ask for a player that isn't like a core player or whatever, and I want to get them, generally I'm able to. So it's not like that. But yeah, look, this is a regime under Brendan Shanahan and guys underneath that have been around for 10 years, and they've seen a lot of they've not seen success. Like that's part of it, and it gets tight. But I generally feel that the solution to a tight situation is making things more tight is not helping things. That's my general philosophy on it. And in this particular situation, I feel like in the way Mitch Marner has dealt with media this season, it's gotten tighter and tighter more than anybody else, to the point where it's like it has to be spoken about. If Mitch Marner for 1 year, for whatever, didn't invite the sports media because he did whatever, we give the benefit of the doubt. But the problem was there was a 1 month period during the season where he took a break from the media just unilaterally. So anytime he was asked for it, he didn't speak for like a month. And then there was a situation beyond that where it just, there was the whole, we were talking about other players and he's like, yeah, we don't listen to what you think. I'm like, wait a minute, like us, like, or social media, like, what are you talking about here? And it just got so combative to the point where it's like, okay, is this productive? And so because it's just spiraling, this just adds to it, because in my mind, the benefit of the doubt is now lost with all this stuff. And new precedents are being set, which is why it's being called out, which is why we called it out.
And look, you brought up when you're talking about, an Oilers player, that was Connor McDavid, who literally I remember that during a press conference, it was after the press conference, and he told, I think it was Mark Spector, like, can we have a chat? Like right then and there, he went and he addressed it.
Right.
And to me, what that speaks to, he's not only the highest paid player on the team, he's the captain. Like, to me, that's where I think this is what bothers me. This is a guy who is one of the higher paid players on the team. He's an assistant. I know he's not the captain, but he's an assistant captain, so he's in a leadership role. Like, what bothers me is this is somebody that's supposed to be a leader of this group, and the perception of him has gotten worse and worse. Right. And we're not even close to talking about his contract status, because there isn't any time really to talk about it, because we haven't heard from him talk about it, and it's coming, and I don't foresee it being any good.
For me, the bare minimum in that situation, and we referenced it in the article too, in 2019, he was an RFA and he was having it, and he did the same that he normally does. And when he was asked about it, he said, listen, my agent's handling it, but that's all I can really say right now. That's the bare minimum. Entertain the question.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do. Well, none of us are gonna like cross-examine him like
right.
and be like, no, you have to answer this. But to shy away from it altogether, Dave, to your point, I agree. Like it doesn't exhibit, if you're a Leaf fan, what you want to see in that regard, which is why it's problematic. And I think it's the bare minimum in that situation, which is like, just don't treat it differently. If you start treating it differently, it looks like you're affected of it. Like and if you are, then that's a different dialogue. That's a different conversation. But yeah, like there are other avenues to have conversations, whether it's off the record or whatever, to smooth things over. But it's just been so closed off that, yeah, I don't know. Like, that's why I question the whole, is he cut out for the market? Because, maybe in Anaheim, or maybe I hate to single out other fan bases. I'm not trying to do that. But like maybe in other markets, you'll have to do less media and not be spoken to. You didn't even really speak that much this season compared to other years.
Yeah.
and certainly more newsworthy this year. And it's that's maybe where you want to go. But I remember Brian Burke said a long time ago, like when you're a Toronto Maple Leaf, it comes with a certain responsibilities that come with it. And for someone who's born in this market, raised in this market, it's actually kind of shocking that there isn't that comprehension of that.
Well, it's interesting. Like, I don't know, is he good enough? I suppose, do the Leafs feel he's good enough to not have to bear some of those responsibilities?
Maybe.
Like that's the question, right? Because that you would assume that everyone would have to deal with that. Like you said, it's part of being in this market. But if this is a situation where Mitch's like, well, I'm not dealing with this, and I'm still gonna come out and play and do my best and whatever, I want to get paid. But the media, I'm not dealing with them anymore. So that's what it feels like it's kind of happening. I still don't understand. Like you said, who was going to cross-examine this guy if they did allow everybody out to these media event and just obviously the question's going to ask, hey, Mitch, how are contract negotiations going? Are they ongoing? And he probably would have said exactly what you said. I'm not really thinking about it. My agent, they're working on things. We'll see what happens, blah, blah. And that's it. But I'm not answering any more questions. Anyone got anything about the event? And that could have been it. That would have been all.
Yeah.
I don't think Mark Masters is going to go hard in on
No.
him, like, to the point where he shouldn't have been there. Like it is just kind of ridiculous when you kind of pull back, and it's like by not bringing them in, it created way bigger of a situation than it would have if they would have just answered that one question head on, basically say nothing, and then can we move on to the event? And that would have been it. That would have been all. Now,
look, I will say, like, some people think we're picking on Mitch Marner, like, because it's only about this kind of stuff. And, like, John Tavares is a UFA as well. Well, you know what? If we were on the red carpet, we would have been able to talk to John Tavares too.
Right.
And we weren't afforded that because of the whole changing of the rules, because of everyone who was there and all that other stuff. So it's not even a matter of that. But at the NHL draft, Austin Matthews was at the Four Nations face-off. And it got to the point where he started having to, it seemed reluctantly, but having to entertain questions about Mitch and about Craig Berube, like just asking the thoughts of it. And you can see Austin laughing. He's like, I thought we were here to talk about this. And it's like, well, yeah, we talked about that. Like, but there are those questions. But then it was followed up with a Mitch question. He's like, look, all I'll say about Mitch is this. But at least he did that. That's the bare minimum. That's all you got to do.
Exactly. There's a give and take. Everyone knows that that's the case. And
Yes.
doesn't seem like Mitch is willing to give a whole lot right now.
But like, you're supposed to do like a 3-minute infomercial for his event just because he's him? Sorry, but why is there interest in Mitch Marner? Why? Because he plays for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah.
So sorry. Like I know, like I was getting a lot of like replies like, oh, he has no business to whatever. Well, first off, you didn't read the article and the fact that he didn't invite media before. And second, yeah, you're only interested in Mitch Marner because he's a member of the Toronto Maple Leafs. So if that's the door that got you in there, you got to respect the door.
100%. And
Zach Hyman's holding a golf tournament tomorrow, and media will be there.
Yes.
Is Marner going to be there?
I don't know. I did see that thing, but I'm a little under the weather, so I'm staying home. But yeah,
be interesting to see if he is there.
I'd bet Marner stays home because it's in Toronto, right? He does it here in Toronto usually.
Yeah, there were times where, like, I remember there was a Smash Fest, and remember there was a lot of interest in Alex Kerfoot after, I think it was like the playoff where he had that mistake or whatever, and so he was on the list. And then I remember like 2 days before he was no longer. He was no longer going to be there. So it's like it happens, but it's different. Alex Kerfoot was a depth player for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Mitch Marner is a star, talented, elite superstar. And with that comes responsibility.
I've got a hypothetical for you. Okay. If there were no trade protection involved in Mitch Marner's contract, do you think that he'd have been dealt by now?
I don't know if he would have been dealt by now, but I do think that there would be more noise about trade offers that have been made. Because at that point, you don't even have to go consult Marner, right? Like the whole thing about this, what makes this so unique and why there's a bottle of information that hasn't been released yet is the fact that the Leafs themselves don't want to look like they're trying to trade him if they are or if they aren't. Like they're being as deferential as you possibly can be. That if something does finally come to them and they're like, this is big, then they can go. And then it's like, well, at least you can pitch to the Marner side and we'll look at the return, right? Like we wouldn't take this to you otherwise. But if there's no trade protection, nothing has to happen. They would obviously be respectful and let him know, hey, this is happening before it happens or whatever. But they don't have to. Here, they absolutely have to, right? Like it's a whole other thing, and that's the difference there.
I still just look at like if he's done with media and he's just like not going to be taking, doing what he's supposed to be doing in terms of basic, being a Maple Leaf and handling media. Like, how could he possibly be entertaining an extension to stay in Toronto? Or how could the Maple Leafs, knowing that he's just going to be a bit of a handful in that regard, be ready to up this guy another 5, 6, 7, 8 years?
Well, the other thing too is like trying to compare this situation. Let's look at William Nylander last year, right? So William Nylander,
but Nylander's hasn't necessarily been combative. Nylander just doesn't talk. Like that's different. Right. I think it's Marner's combative, and he like blames media for things, and so I think they're kind of different.
No, but I'm just saying in terms of how media would approach Marner this year under the same circumstances, right?
Mm-hmm.
Come camp. With Nylander, he came out, he said, listen, I'll talk about this once, but afterwards I'm not going to talk about it. He created his own rules of engagement. And generally, I think you could say, outside of when noise was getting close that a deal was there,
mm-hmm.
we respected that. We absolutely respected that. Nylander was not asked every day about his contract status or anything like that. Like, for all the media stuff, we're like I heard a lot of people that we were too lenient in that situation.
Yeah.
Where it's that absolutely a story and you should ask about it every day. But we're respectful of the terms of engagement that were there. So that's what makes this Marner thing so you have to call it out. Like that's why. Because it's like if you let this slide, what's the line? Where does it go next?
Well, so in my assumption would be that Marner's going to say the exact same thing on day one of camp. He's going to come out and say, I'm going to talk and speak about this once, and that's it. We're going to move on. He'll probably like just copy paste the exact same thing that Nylander, and I believe Matthew said the exact same thing too at the start of camp 2 years ago.
Right, but then Matthews got his extension before that window.
Right, but like the year before, he's like, I don't want to talk.
But he had more platitude because he wasn't even eligible to sign, and that's a simple default. He's like, I can't even sign a contract now if I want to.
Right. I think the difference between the two is like, when it comes to Willie and when it comes to Mitch, like, sure, you guys in the room might not be asking him about the contract. But stooges like Dave and I are talking about the contract, and guys on the Fan and guys on 1050 and you're going to be writing about it at least, even though there's no face-to-face.
Yeah.
Between the two players, I can guarantee you one guy consumes a lot of that media, although he says he doesn't. I have a feeling he does. And the other one, I guarantee you, does not consume any of that media. So like there's another kind of difference between the two, in my opinion.
No, you're right. It's going to be, look, I think whatever happens, whether he's here next year or not next year or whatever, it's just going to come out of nowhere just because of the secrecy, the no move element and the sensitivities and all that stuff that comes with it. It's going to be really, really out of nowhere, like an RKO. Like it's going to be, the Austin Matthews extension was kind of out of nowhere. It's like late August, right? So I think, but we'll see. But yeah, I mean, in terms of this, my style of reporting, I've done this for a long time. I don't like to go after individual players. It's not my style. Like, I don't do it. But when it comes to the tenets of access and issues that we're getting called out for, or they're trying to put certain roadblocks that are obvious, you have to, it's a responsibility that you have to call it out. Now, you don't have to call it out all the time, and we've let a lot of things go, but it gets to a point. And that's where, for those listening on the podcast, wondering like why I would write something like that, where if it looks like a hit piece or whatever, it's not about that. It's about access and the reason why there's interest in this player. And there's a certain respect that comes with that.
Do you feel like when it comes to this Marner situation that it's been played down a little bit like lately? Like you wrote this article. I'm a little surprised nobody else had, especially like no other columnists have decided to touch this.
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. I think one, it was the second week of July when everyone's on vacation, and I don't really ever take time off. I'm not trying to out myself as a workaholic. It's certainly not that.
Alter the grinder.
It's not a matter of that. But there is that. And also, like, the outlets that are named there, you know, they co-own the team. So it's a very difficult spot that they're in, right? Like, there is that element. And yeah, their parent company was allowed access, but different brands, right? Like City for Rogers, and CTV and CP24. Although if you watch that CP24 interview, it was like, what is this? And then you're putting them in an awkward spot because it looks like they're missing out on the main like thing of journalism, which is talk about like one question about the Leafs, right? So it's a difficult compromising spot. So I think the reason you haven't seen that is because neither side on there wants to look self-serving and being woe is me. And me having no ties to either side and putting the whole basket in there, I think makes it a more fair, objective look at things in that regard. And that might be why. And look, a lot of other places, like I did see the Toronto Sun reference that there were rules put out for why the Marner Foundation was handled differently. They didn't take the same tack that I did, but they mentioned it in like a notebook. And I'm sure there will be some other stuff that comes after this week, because I'm sure it will be a topic later in the summer or into September or whatever the case may be. But yeah, it's the dead of summer. This is where all the insiders are off. Everyone's trying to be up and try and recharge the batteries. But yeah, in this case, I wouldn't have written about it if I didn't get some sources on both sides kind of telling me everything that was going on. And I was just like, okay, I've got to see what's going on here, because there has to be a line. And I would have felt, knowing this, I would have felt guilty if I didn't write anything about this and I just let it slide.
Dave doing God's work for the media. God's work for the mainstream media.
It's not bad. Look, hey, I got a lot of hate for it. Like, there's very little to gain and a lot to lose when you put out something like that. It's not easy, especially when you're there every day, right? It really isn't. I think a lot of people don't understand that, but you owe it to the profession. You owe it to kind of say what's going on. Like, and it's a big story, and he's a big story around it. And if this was just one time, I think we would have given them the platitude on it. But the problem is it's not been one time. It's a limitation of access that has gotten so bigger and more combative with each passing day that something had to be said.
So thanks so much to David Alter, gracious with his time. What we're actually going to do is we're going to split things up. So this was part one of our conversation, and then we're going to continue the conversation tomorrow. It ended up being like an hour-long chat, an hour-long episode. So we're going to split into two discussions. Today was all about Mitch Marner. Tomorrow's episode, make sure you come back because then we're going to get into his thoughts on the Maple Leafs offseason so far and kind of what to expect going forward. And we got into an interesting discussion too about kind of coaching and kind of the economics behind coaching. And it was kind of interesting. It's not where we intended on going, but sometimes when you just get three guys chatting in a mic and it's a conversation that goes in many different directions, you don't know what you're talking about. So tomorrow's podcast will be a lot of fun with Dave. So make sure you return again for tomorrow's show. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcast platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on X at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_ or studio. You can shoot a follow to David Alter as well at DAlter on Twitter. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.